This is Alexa Linton, and you're listening to the Whole Horse Podcast. I'm coming to you from the Cowichan Valley on beautiful Vancouver Island in Canada, and I'm excited to be bringing amazing instructors from around the world to share their knowledge about all the ways that we can keep ourselves and our horses well and happy, and about some of the cutting-edge techniques, training, and different aspects that are coming into the horse industry and changing it from within. I'm so excited you're here, and I'm excited about the times that we live in and the shifts that are happening in the horse industry before our eyes. Let's get started. Hi everyone, it's Alexa Linton here, and you're on the Whole Horse Podcast. And today on the podcast, I have another first-time podcaster, which was very surprising to me. I have someone here that I really look up to, and a lot of my clients work with and also absolutely love. And it's my first time being able to chat with her. Welcome, Elisha Edwards, to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
You are so welcome. And here in British Columbia, I'm assuming that you're in British Columbia. Are
Well,
you are you here in the province?
my home base is Airdrie, Alberta. So I've
Okay,
spent several years in Alberta now.
nice.
But of course, Riva's ranch and my mom is in Armstrong,
Yes.
BC. So since this whole pandemic thing hit, I ended up coming here, and then I just haven't left. I've just been here because
Wow.
I'm with the horses and the wide open spaces.
Yep.
So it's just easier, and
Totally.
we're doing lots of healing stuff out here. So it's been great.
Nice. Okay, so my
Yeah.
intuition was on
Yes.
this
Yeah.
morning.
I'm on
I was like,
Pacific
"Oh my
time.
gosh,
Yeah.
I didn't ask that."
Yeah, I'm
That's
on I'm
awesome.
on BC time, and I'll probably have a harder time getting used to going back to Alberta now. I've been here for probably 10
Yeah.
months now, so I love BC.
Yeah,
It's great. It's
BC's
beautiful.
awesome. BC's
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah.
Amazing. Yes. So, coming back around to something that you shared a little bit of, I want to hear about your background, and I have curiosity for a number of reasons. So, when I was training as an equine sport therapist, I actually, have met your mom and may have met you at, various horse expos, and
Yeah.
I think your mom came in and actually helped us in our program. And so, yeah, I would love to hear more about that journey, because I know for many of our listeners, Riva's Remedies, especially if they're out here like in BC or Alberta, is, yeah, one of our main go-to products. It's something that
Right.
I
Yes.
recommend a lot, and, like, love the line, and yeah,
Yes.
so
Yes.
would
It's
love to
more.
kind of hear more.
For sure. Okay. Well, so I don't know how far back to go here. I got my first horse when I was about 10, and we were on Vancouver Island at the time,
Mhm.
in Nanaimo. And my mom, of course, was just starting her career as a holistic practitioner around that time, doing her degree in clinical nutrition and homeopathy. And her first love was horses ever since she was little. And we got my first horse when I was about 10. And he was a real handful, that horse. I think looking back on it from a 10-year-old's perspective, I think there probably wasn't anything wrong with
Mhm.
the horse, but he was very scary for me. And we were green and all of that. And so it wasn't long before my mom started to marry everything she was learning and practicing with humans with the horses, using homeopathy and herbs. And I remember her standing over the mortar and pestle, crushing up tablets and things like that, because around that time there wasn't really much available for horses as far as supplements. And as we know now, nutrient deficiencies for horses is one of the leading causes of disease for them. So having good supplements, being able to provide the nutrition they need, is a really important part of their recovery and also their prevention as
Mhm.
well. So that kind of led into a homeopathic pharmacy. And she started her first handful of products mostly because she was doing consultations, and so she needed some tools to provide the people with. It's like, okay, put your horse on potassium, and then you go to the health food store and you're trying to
Mhm.
you know empty capsules and crush everything up. So that's how the line was born. And then on my background, of course, my dad was a pharmacist as well. So I had a broad perspective of healthcare from very
Wow.
early on, very holistic, and then
Mm-hmm.
the pharmaceuticals on the other side. And I'm a firm believer in integrative medicine. I think that is the best of both worlds. But I wanted to learn
Yeah.
more. I knew how important and how effective natural medicine and healthcare was, but I actually wanted to know more about the science behind it. And so I went to the University of Alberta and I did my degree in organic chemistry. And I actually, ironically, ended up working in the pharmaceutical industry for about 5 years as a chemist, as a
Mm-hmm.
process chemist in the lab. And that was a real pivotal point for me, I think, it just in my understanding of what we see in natural medicine, because I started to see that it's all the same. It's all the same. It's just the
Yeah.
interpretation that varies a little bit, right? And so then you take what you see in a little flask and try and apply it to a horse, right? Like there's so many factors
Mm-hmm.
and variables that just can't be measured. And so that really brought me back to the holistic world. And I joined my mom back in Riva's Remedies in about 2011. And I've been working with horses ever since. And here I am.
Amazing. And here you
Yeah,
are.
so
Here you
and here
are.
I am. So,
Yay.
just after lots of consultations and, thousands of success cases, I think we were just in a position to deliver this knowledge in a bigger way to the horse community, because we've just seen
Yes.
so many miraculous things happen, and it's time that we start teaching horse owners that there's way more options that they think are available for their
Yeah,
horses.
I love it. I love
Yeah.
it. Now, I mean, there's so many. It's so funny because I think of this conversation. I'm like, oh my gosh, there's so many ways we can go with this. I, um, I heard, kind of more about you, Alicia, through your online program. I have several clients that are raving fans of
Awesome.
the what you're teaching them. Like absolutely
Yes.
raving fans. They're just loving it. And I can see how it's helping their horses and so that got my ears perked. I was like, "Hey, what's this about?" And yeah, like I've just been really loving watching their passions grow. And so, what for you, I know this is probably a big question, but what are some of those foundations of wellness for you that you really kind of hit on in that work? I know your training is called Healing Horses Their Way. So like how,
Where
how
do
does
we
that
start? Right?
where do we begin? Yeah.
Yes. So when I put this program together, I spent a long time in education myself, teaching and learning. I'm a lifelong learner. So it was really important to me when I laid out the program that I was leading you through the healing journey with your horse. And so one of the ways in which I did that, so in module 1, we just talk about the holistic model and what that means to the horse and the
Hmm.
concept of healing layers. Many of the horses we're seeing today are so diseased. They've got laminitis and insulin resistance, and as they get older, it transforms into Cushing's syndrome, and they've got skin allergies and breathing problems. So we can't tackle it
Yeah.
all at once when you're dealing with many of those cases. So we talk about, where do we start? What's the layer that's showing you today that we can work with? And that's stripping back that onion to get to the underlying cause. And
Yep.
one of the most important or biggest keys in equine wellness is to identify the underlying cause. We need to know what's causing this. And I think for a lot of horse owners, the value that they're getting is they're making connections between something that happened 2 years ago and something that's still present today. It's just manifested
Hmm.
itself differently. And so that's module 1, just making those connections, understanding your horse better, what they've been trying to communicate, what their bodies have been trying to communicate for so long.
Yep.
And then we get
Yep.
into solutions.
Mhm. Mhm. And so with that first module, can you just go a little bit deeper into
Yeah.
what that's about?
Yeah,
Yeah.
so I have it broken down into a few lessons, but The first one is the holistic model, which means we're looking at all aspects of the horse. So this is where we start to connect all those
Yep.
symptoms from the past to today and what that really means. We talk about the three underlying causes of equine disease, which is stress, nutrient deficiencies, and toxicity. And
Yep.
that makes it sound very simple, but it's actually not, because just in the domestic world today, it can manifest any which way. There's a ton of toxins, including feed toxicity, the overuse of medications and dewormers and vaccinations and all of that kind of
Yep.
toxicity. Um, and that's just something we can't get away from. And then you have the stress aspect, which with horses is key, because whenever you're
Yes.
working on any kind of condition, stress is always there. So how do we manage that? How do we, what sort of things can we implement to reduce stress for them? And it's different for every horse. And then, we talk about the physical, but then there's emotional too. Horses feel a lot and they
Mm-hmm.
reflect back to you a lot about what's happening in your life. And so we just have to start somewhere. And I think if you present too much at once, it can really overwhelm the student. So we want to just start
Yes.
simple, just pick a thing, right? And let's just start there. The
Yep.
other
Unravel that ball of
Yes,
yarn
yes,
first.
exactly.
Yes.
And then, as the course evolves, they have a foundation to fall back
Yes.
on. So when they start
Yeah.
learning new things and new solutions and new remedies, you always go back to what was the underlying cause? What layer am I looking at now? How has this disease or unwellness transformed itself over time? And so once you have a clear understanding of your horse, the solution part is actually the easiest, right? Picking the stuff, picking, the
Mm-hmm.
ways to manage stress and the homeopathic remedies and the nutrients. That's kind of a little bit easier once you have a clear understanding of what you're treating or what you're trying to resolve. The other thing that
Mm-hmm.
I think is important for horse owners to know is what to expect in the healing journey. So in conventional healthcare, we want quick results. We want it's a band-aid approach. We want to see an imbalance or unwellness, and we want to provide them with a cure, and we want it to be fixed in 24
Yep.
hours. But in the
Yep.
holistic model, it doesn't work like that. The body has a natural intelligence that we don't understand as fully as maybe we will in the future, but we just have to allow that healing process to continue. And there's four big ways in which that presents. And there's the horses that you just get them on a program, and it's just a linear improvement. They just get better for
Yep.
every day. They're getting better.
Yep.
And then you have horses that take that path for a little while, and then they plateau and they are at a standstill. So you have to stimulate the body to keep going with their healing by changing
Mm.
programs and things like that, just the reassessment. And then you have horses that get worse too, right? And those
Yes. Oh,
horses
totally.
and people laugh because I cheer when horses get worse. If they're just on a new program and we're implementing new things,
Yep.
the worst case scenario is for them not to respond at all. That's when I know that we've missed the
Exactly.
mark, right?
Totally.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
so I love the detox reaction, and I love the immediate improvement. And then sometimes there's a delay, which I always find is interesting too. So some horse owners will phone or email and say, nothing's changing. Like, I'm doing all this stuff. It's been 4 or 6 weeks, nothing's changing. And then all of a sudden, 3 months later, they have a different horse on their hands. It's just a
Yep.
gradual improvement that just takes a while for the body to respond to. And I think in some cases, they just have to learn a new way of being. Like the chemistry in their bodies has to learn to change. And for some horses, that can take a while, depending on the horse. So in a
Absolutely.
nutshell, that
Mm-hmm.
is that's the start. That's where we start.
Yeah.
Determining the
That's the
underlying
beginning.
cause, choosing the
Mm-hmm.
layer we're working on, understanding and making connections with over the lifetime of traumas and events, that your horse has endured, and what has that thrown off for them physically. Like we first start with a physical foundation, and we always take into account the emotions too, in the holistic model. But it's tricky because if you have horses that are really physically unwell for a very long time, they present like they're depressed and that there's something emotional going on because their energy fields are so small because their physical body isn't well and they're
Yeah.
not emanating light as well as they should be. Their vitality drops. So we really want to make sure we're supporting everything physical so the physical body feels well, and then you can start to see more clearly what's emotional and what's not.
Mm, mhm, mhm. And I want to unpack the piece around stressors because this is something we talk
Yes.
about a lot about on the podcast.
Okay.
Um, is yeah, stress and the impacts of stress, trauma and the impacts of trauma. What for you are sort of the main pieces of that, the main stressors that you see or work with? Yeah.
There is three of the most major stressors when we're looking at how it contributes to disease and unwellness. And
Mhm.
taking into account the essence of the horse, which, in a natural state would have freedom to move. They have a dynamic within their herd, they're social beings. But really, it's the three F's: it's forage, freedom, and friendship. Those are the biggest three that
Mhm.
horses need in their lives to be well. And how that happens is different for every horse in every situation. But if you take a horse that's not well physically, especially if they have soundness issues, and put them in a stall, you are preventing healing, right? Because the body goes into a stress reaction. And as we know,
Mhm.
for humans, what a big deal that makes in slowing down slowing down healing and depressing immunity. Same is tenfold for
Well, yeah.
horses,
Mhm.
right? They need to be
Mhm.
out moving with their herd, touching them, all of those things. So that confining horses is a biggie when they're not doing well. And sometimes, depending on the horse, it's okay to do that, but don't put them in isolation alone. They need to know that their herd is close by. That's who they look to for protection, even though they love you, right? And they appreciate your protection too, but they need the herd first. And so um, keeping them in isolation is a big stressor for them away from other horses. They need
Mhm.
to just have that community.
Mhm.
They need to touch and groom and all of those things. Um, and forage. I think when we are looking at cases of metabolic syndrome, so insulin resistance, Cushing syndrome, all those sugar carbohydrate problems, probably the biggest stressor we see is infrequent feedings. And when you look
Yeah.
at the anatomy of a horse, we they have to be eating all the time, whether they're insulin resistant or not. The
Mhm.
key is to slow them down and to implement some tools so that it helps balance their blood sugar. That's really the key with metabolic syndrome. So infrequent feedings really exacerbate stress, and as soon as the horse is stressed, their adrenal glands pump really hard. It pumps adrenaline and cortisol, and those are very beneficial hormones in short-term stress situations. But in long term,
Mhm.
they can do a lot of damage, and we see that over and over with the horses. And I would say, just as a very general number, I would say 70% of the horses I work on have depressed or low adrenal output. For that reason, it's just
Yes.
stress. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, for sure. And I mean, I've talked about it quite a bit on the podcast. I live in the Cowichan Valley, um, here on Vancouver Island. The majority of horses, live on their own in small areas. Um,
Hmm.
and it's definitely been a topic on the podcast. Okay, how do we manage stress?
Right.
How in these circumstances that may or may not be changeable, what do we do
Yes.
for these horses? So do you have any solutions for those people where it just really isn't an option for their horse to live any other way? Is there anything that they can do to mitigate that stress?
Yeah. Well, and horses are so resilient too, and they adapt well is too. So there's other parts of the
Yeah.
world where horses don't have the same luxury. They're not out in big areas, and they are confined to smaller areas. But I would say one mitigating factor is exercise. Just because they're in
Yeah.
a smaller area doesn't mean you can't walk them, trot them, run them, ride them. And for a lot of horse owners, they think, oh, I don't have an arena. This is impossible for me. I'm just talking about walking up and down the driveway 10 times,
Yeah,
right? Like it goes a long ways taking a horse that's standing still all the time and moving. Like that's just moving their body. And
totally.
there's more than there's so many benefits to exercise with horses if you think about all the muscle they have and bones and detoxification that's required, and exercise helps with all of it, including their digestion, right? It's peristalsis,
Mm,
so it helps them move their food through their digestive system. So especially horses that are maybe insulin resistant or pre-insulin resistant, you can kind of see those easy keeper qualities. It's really important. So
mhm.
I say 15 minutes 3 times a week. Let's just start there, like just walking briskly.
Yep.
It doesn't even need to be, you don't have to put a saddle on and trailer and all of that stuff. I think that gets kind of daunting for horse owners, but just moving.
Yes.
Let's just get them
Yes.
moving.
And it's cool that you say that because I think a lot of people kinda get in their heads about it and go like, "Oh my god, that means I have to ride," or "That means I have to," and it's like, "No, just go, like, as if you were taking your dog for a walk. Take your horse for a walk."
Absolutely, and take more than one at a time,
Right?
right? Take more than one at a
Yeah,
time if you
totally.
can do that, and also it's spending time with them, and they are
Yep.
getting emotionally connected during that time too. And horses thrive on that. They need that emotional connection. First comes the herd, but also with their humans. They love their humans. They're very social
Mhm.
beings. So just spending that extra bit of time with them can be enough to reduce a lot of stress for sure.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, excellent. And that's it's such an easy piece. I know for my mare that's what we do, because she's a bit more on the easy keeper side.
Right.
And so it's like, okay, we got to go do our workout today, and she
Absolutely.
she
And
likes it. She's like,
oh,
okay, all
yeah.
right, let's do this. It feels good to move and then I notice as well we've got about 11 acres, but it's like really long, and so they probably walk up and down from top to bottom about a dozen times a day, and I'm like, "Yes, keep
That's
doing that,"
amazing.
'cause
I know. And
it's
if you
just
think that's a lot of
great
ground to
to have
cover.
that.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's a lot of ground to
Absolutely.
cover. It'd be kinda cool to have, like, a little monitor or something to see how far they actually go in a day.
Yes. No
Yeah,
kidding.
yeah, for sure. Mhm.
Yeah, and good for hoof health
That's
too. Like they
great
need
for
to
hoof health.
move.
Yeah,
Yes, like it gets all that blood circulating up through the body and toxins removed
yeah,
from the lamina. It's really, really important. Exercise is probably the number one thing you can do for stress relief. And then you can get into
fantastic.
some of the remedies type stuff too, like magnesium. I love
Mhm.
magnesium for reducing tension
Oh,
and
I love
stress.
magnesium.
It
Yes.
it makes a huge
Yeah.
difference for horses.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would love your thoughts on magnesium. Last time I muscle checked Diva, she went to magnesium oxide, and I was like,
Oh,
interesting,
interesting.
because I know there's
Yeah.
so many different types of magnesium, and that typically is not the kind of main one that would be recommended for horses. So yeah,
Yeah.
what are
Well,
your thoughts on magnesium and the types?
yeah. So there's two main types in the feed stores. There's other types in the human health food stores as well, like the magnesium. I think it comes in bisglycinate. I think that's one
Yep,
form for humans.
totally.
But for horses, it's usually two decisions. It's magnesium oxide and the magnesium citrate. I'm not sure. I don't recommend oxide barely at all. I just never recommend it
No.
because I know
Yep.
that so many horses absorb the citrate better. It's the organic form,
Yep.
and when we're talking about organic forms of nutrients, minerals, we're talking about the bioavailability of those
Yes.
nutrients. They absorb better. They're able to be utilized better, and so citrate's always number one for me. But there is also a
Nice.
huge price difference, between the two, and so I
I
think
noticed that.
yes, it's
Yes.
huge. It's
It's
huge, and
huge.
and one thing I will say about magnesium and all the other nutrients is sometimes it's not about that particular nutrient, but it's all the other stuff that's in with it. So in the course, I teach, the guidelines of supplements. Like if you're really trying to be specific in resolving a condition and you're using therapeutic nutrition to do that, You can't just say, oh, it's got 10 other things in there. They're not important. They're all important. Everything you put in your horse's mouth is important when they're unwell and then they're trying to recover. So the magnesium citrate that Riva's Remedies sells is just pure citrate. There's no binders, fillers, or anything like that.
Yeah.
Whereas the oxide, it often comes in really big containers, depending on the brand. I don't really
Yes.
keep up with it, but there can be a lot of other binders and fillers in there that are not life affirmative, or they're not contributing to your horse's health. So that's one thing
Yeah.
I like to watch for,
Yeah.
and the price really does reflect the quality when you're choosing
Yeah.
supplements. So just always to keep that in mind as well.
Fantastic. So this leads me down a home. I have so many rabbit holes going in my head right now.
Oh, there's so
So
much. Yeah,
going
it's a
down the
huge
rabbit
topic.
hole of the mineral piece. Okay, so out here, and I know it's very different. I've traveled to various places around the world, and it's always quite different with this whole vitamin mineral and feeding a multivitamin for horses. I would
Yes.
love your thoughts because this is somewhere where, as an equine sport therapist, I'm always like, oh, and people will be like, I'm feeding this, I'm feeding that, and I'm like, okay, like what? Yeah,
Yeah.
I need your help,
Yes,
Alicia.
okay. So, back to module 1. One of the things
Yeah.
that's really important to recognize is your horse is an individual, and not every horse is created equally. They all have different nutritional requirements. For example, some horses you'll see and they just need high doses of everything, and other horses, more sensitive horses, you give them a low dose of something and it's like they're a different horse in about 10 minutes, right? You get
Yeah.
those differences. So what I'm teaching is you got to look at your horse. You got to look at all the signs and symptoms of your horse, and put that together to really make sure you're delivering the right or correct nutrients for them in the right dosages. And of course, we use muscle testing to do that. It's probably the best tool we have to be able to dig deep into the tissues and cells and be able to see what they require. There's no conventional test to do that. So we have to use some sort of tool to help us with that. So as far as
Mhm.
horses and Maltese, I think that it's necessary in a lot of cases because they're just not getting the nutrition out of their hay. So for example, horses that are
Yep.
on 100% hay diets, they're going to be deficient mostly in the fat soluble vitamins like vitamin A and vitamin E, and especially essential fatty acids. But there are other ways to get essential fatty acids out of them. And when you can, do it through food. So I love the crushed flax or hemp
Yes.
seeds or
I love crushed flax.
chia,
Yep.
right?
Mhm.
All of those really
Mhm.
plant based, always go plant based with horses to get the nutrients
Yep.
into them because they're 100% bioavailable when it's in their food.
Yes.
So that's
Yes.
always what I tell students to do. Let's look at food. How can we provide them with more balanced nutrition through their food? Now, I don't really get into
Yes.
the number crunching necessarily. I know a lot of people do that. They'll make sure that the multi that you're giving is balanced. But I also know that many of those horses, it's not enough sometimes, right? Like we are just meeting their
Yep.
requirements by doing that. That's it. And
Yep.
and their general requirements that often were specified, decades ago for all horses in general. So it really doesn't address your horse in a lot of ways. But if you
Yes.
see some horses, so then I do get people saying to me, "Oh yeah, well, I went and put him on this multi, and he just got so much better." And I look at the ingredients, and they're all pretty bad. Right? They're not very
Yeah.
high
Yeah.
quality nutrients, but the horse improved because it's better than what they were getting. Right? They just,
Yes.
especially if you take horses that are really unwell and have had very high stress lifestyles, heavily medicated, all of those factors will deplete nutrients in horses. So, anything is better than nothing at that point. But then once they hit that
Mhm.
plateau, you got to go further. Right? You got to go further to really
Yep.
address specific deficiencies that they have. So I'm very much about taking one horse and customizing programs for them. And if you need a general mineral supplement or vitamin supplement, if you think they're deficient, just watch your binders and fillers, whatever you're choosing. And when you're choosing vitamin and minerals, choose the organic form so they're more bioavailable to them. They're doing a better job in the body.
Mhm. Mhm. And for a lot of people, I think, they've been feeding one thing and they maybe just don't know if there's another option and it's that they continue. So if they're at the feed store looking at those, the feed tags, what are they looking for if they're looking for a better quality mineral? Is it going to say organically sourced mineral, or how does it show up on those feed
No,
tags?
it doesn't. And
I know,
that's
and oftentimes, yeah, I've looked and gone, I don't know what's in here.
Yes, I know. And
You know?
so one of the challenges, especially for feed, is that it's not mandatory to have ingredient labels on. So when I ask, so I do consultations and so does my mom. And so when we ask clients to send us the ingredient list, often what we get is just a crude analysis of breakdown of macronutrients, which is the carbohydrates, fat, proteins.
Yep,
But it doesn't tell you what those sources are, and often, there's a ton of oils in them and, you know, sugars and other things that are not going to contribute to wellness depending on the horse and the condition that you're struggling with. So, understanding what nutrients and the forms are the best is just comes in so handy. Right when you're standing there trying to find labels, or and some people will email the companies and ask for ingredients. I mean, I don't think they
yep.
withhold it, but they definitely don't make it easy in a lot of cases.
No. No, absolutely not, and I know as well, like, for a lot of, like, say, like, more grain type supplements, the same is true. You see your carbohydrates, proteins, fats, but you don't see that there's, corn or barley or,
Yes,
different things that are
exactly.
in there that might be impacting them metabolically, right?
Absolutely.
Um,
And even just the immune system. And every horse is
yep,
different again, but you notice it more of these feed allergies as horses get older in general, especially if they've
yep,
had underlying conditions or nutrient deficiencies for a really long time and they have poor immunity to begin with. They can get very sensitive to the feed you put them on. And sometimes it can be one ingredient. So one of my rules is less is better, because if you have
yep,
a supplement that's got 100 different things in there and they're reacting to one thing, how would you ever know what that is? And two, if they're really deficient in something, there's only so much of 100 things you can put in a teaspoon. So they're never going to get
yeah,
enough to correct that deficiency, in other words.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
for
So
sure, for
another
sure.
reason to really
Okay.
get specific with your horse.
I love that. And I want to circle back around to muscle testing. So, a lot of
Yes.
people that have listened to the podcast, they may have heard me talk about muscle testing and, my work with muscle testing and applied kinesiology. I would love to hear, because this is a little bit more specificity on how it's used nutritionally. Um, yeah,
Right.
what you might have
Okay.
to share about this body of work. This I
Yes.
love applied kinesiology so much. I actually have an online course on it, so because
Yes.
it's so
Yes.
fun,
It's
right?
so good,
Yeah.
yes. And
Hmm.
like I said, it's one of the most valuable tools that we have, because there's no blood test available for a lot of different things.
No,
So, however we can
completely.
communicate with the intelligence of the cells is is a win, right? When we're trying to formulate
Yeah.
good programs. So, I've been muscle
Oh my
testing
gosh.
for,
Yes.
I don't know, 20 years, 25 years, my whole life basically.
Yep.
My mom started
Yep.
muscle testing before it was actually a thing, right? And so
Yep.
because that's just a very holistic practice, and thousands of chiropractors and natural practitioners use it all over the world. It's becoming more and more mainstream all the time. And so what's beautiful about using it for their horses is, where I'm going with it now is to really start communicating with the autonomic nervous system. So we are looking for recognition from the autonomic nervous system, and that is an indicator
Mm.
on whether they recognize a substance as being allergic or hyperallergenic, or if they're deficient, So you can start communicating in that way to a certain part of their brain. So that's sort of how I'm teaching it now. So at the end, the very last module in my program, then once you have a foundation of knowledge, then we start using the muscle testing. And I think one thing that's really important for everybody that's muscle testing is knowledge. Because if you don't know it exists, are you ever going to think to test it? And so you
It's
can miss
so
a lot.
true.
Yes,
Yep.
just by
Yep.
not having that knowledge. So, first becomes the foundation of knowledge. And so, in the program, it was amazing because every student takes a horse through the entire program. So, they get to go through the journey with their horse. And so, with every module, they're learning something new about their horse. And that's just based on knowledge. That's just based on science and knowledge and um, effective solutions for horses, whether it's homeopathy, herbs, nutrition, diet. And then by the time we get to the end, now it's great because you have all this knowledge, you know your horse really well, and then you can start muscle testing. So now you can start putting it all together by getting even more specific, by communicating with the cells on a much deeper level.
Okay, I have to ask. So, communicating with the autonomic nervous system,
Yeah.
what does that look like?
So when
Yes.
the autonomic nervous system controls everything in our body, it's all,
Mhm.
we our bodies do. I couldn't even hazard a guess. There's hundreds of thousands
Oh,
of
it's
chemical reactions, probably
yeah.
more than that, happening at every second. So that's when you're doing more traditional diagnostics, like using blood tests, you're just taking a snapshot in that very moment. It's not a broad picture sort of tool, right? That we can
Yep.
say, especially when you're dealing with chronic health conditions. So by communicating with the autonomic nervous system, and it's controlling your thirst and your hunger and everything that have all the bodily functions, your heartbeat, your heart rate, all of that stuff, it knows everything about your body. So that's really where we want to check in with, to see what is actually missing or what needs to be added. So if you're muscle testing, let's say, and you're going through the organ points and you land on the liver, for example, and your arm drops, that's probably your autonomic nervous system telling you through your surrogate that there is
Mhm.
a
Mhm.
weak energy field around that organ. And that's where the
Yep.
intelligence resides.
Yep. Mm. Yes, sounds very familiar.
Yeah.
I've uh, been I've been working in this way for a long time. It's
Yes,
just so amazing.
it's
It's
amazing.
so amazing. I mean, it took me a long time. I don't know if you were the same. It may not have been the same with your mom being so, really into it. But I came from like super science background,
Yes.
and it was really tough for me because my mind just was like, "No, no, this can't be possible. It's too easy." And,
Yes.
the horses that were around me were like, "Actually, yes, and you were affecting change, and you were being helpful. Keep doing what you're
Yes.
doing." As I had this, like, conflict that was happening within me, around it.
Yes. Well,
Eventually, the
and
applied kinesiology won, right?
yes,
Yeah.
well, exactly, and I think the horses always tell you, right? That you can't, they
Yeah.
just won't let you forget about it. So, but I was the same. I mean,
No.
I grew up this way, but I also was in the science world for several years where I fell away a little bit from the holistic model of
Yep.
things, and I was in a lab, and it either is or it isn't. If you can't see it, it doesn't exist. Like that's sort of the mantra, when
Totally.
you're working with pharmaceutical companies, right? Because that's, you're in the lab, and if it's not on the page, it doesn't exist. Like there is no hypothesis
Yep.
to support. So, coming back where it's just all shades of gray. And I tell my students, like, healing is not on your agenda, it's on your horse's agenda. And you have to just
Yep.
support them through it. That's how they heal, you know? And
Yes.
the
Yes.
journey looks different for every horse, which is so fascinating to me. I just love watching transformations because they're different in every case.
Oh my gosh. They so are. I'm always blown away by how the horses know exactly what they need.
Oh, they so do. They so do. And one thing
Like,
I love, and I've had several people or students tell me this too, is that they so let's say you have two powders. One could be magnesium citrate, and let's
mhm,
say another one is folic acid or something like that. They look identical. They will know which one they need, and I believe it's just because they can read the vibration off the molecules. They are just
mhm,
inherently they know what they need in their body. They just know. They see the vibration. And so often when you get really practiced, you can walk by a horse and you just feel the vibration of B12 because every molecule carries a vibration. So that's when you get,
mm,
it takes a lot of practice and a lot of feel to know that. But yeah, you can
yep.
start to really pick up on that. It's fascinating, and the horses
Oh,
know.
yeah.
The
It is
horses know before you know.
they know.
Yeah.
And isn't it funny because you pick up nutritional information, I pick up body information,
Oh, and yeah,
and
very cool.
so when I walk by a horse, I'm like, "Left hip." You know?
Yeah, and I'm like, "Liver, B12, yeah."
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
They've got a cranial thing out,
Yes.
and
Yeah,
so you
for sure.
yeah, you start to kind of get and it's so true, like, I immediately, like, I'll see a horse, "Yep, this is what needs to happen,"
Yeah.
or what they're wanting at this time, so they're sending it out, and I think,
Yes.
you know, for so many of us as horse people, that's the work. I mean, you've been
That's the
muscle
work.
testing for, 20, 25 years. Yeah, I've been muscle testing for what, 2003, so 17 years. Um, and we're still practicing,
Yes.
you know?
Yes, I know. And yeah, and it takes a really long time, but it's interesting that you say, you walk by a horse and pick up body issues and I pick up nutritional issues. And that really comes back to you really have to have a lot of knowledge to be able to
Ah,
approach
totally.
every aspect of the horse. So I'm not a body
Yes.
worker. So that's just not my area. I'm not an expert in body work. And so I would never probably pick up on that. And this is another important point when you're working on holistic therapies for your horses is find the team, that really
Yeah.
knows because
Yes.
you sometimes you just can't fix a horse with one thing. It's if you're taking a holistic approach, you're looking at all of it. You're looking at their body and their biomechanics and their feet and their teeth and all of those things. So I just love um, people or horse owners that just have a good solid team of people to lean on when their horse needs it.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and you see that in the horse too, is that they've got a team that they're like, "Okay, mom, I need the," or "Okay, human, I need this person now," and
Yes.
that actually, like, will often come up in your muscle checking, right? Like, you're like,
Yes.
"Okay, like, is it me that's supposed to do this thing, or are you needing someone else?" Or, that when that team they feel safe with that team, they'll actually, like, kinda call them up and go, "Okay, this is what I'm needing right now,"
Yeah,
right?
totally. Totally. They know
Yeah,
for sure. And I
and
and I that's one thing I think people in general just love about horses is they're just so big. Their energy is just so big. And
yes.
in that energy field is information, right? It's information we can tap into. And it goes so much deeper. It's spirituality and emotions and the physical
Oh,
intelligence.
yes.
There's just so much there that horses deliver.
I often think that, like, I still have the sensation of just scratching the surface of horses,
Yes,
in terms of
absolutely.
what's possible with them. The depth is almost unfathomable, I think, with so many horses. And yeah, I want to kind of keep this conversation around. So we chatted a little bit about muscle testing, and for those of you that are out there, you can check it out, do some research. You'll definitely find some articles that are like, this stuff doesn't work,
Yes, yeah, there's
and that's
always
a
that.
part of the right, like
Yes,
we're yeah, and yet here Alicia and I are with our combined close to 40 years of working with this, and probably, you know, I can't think how many horses I've worked on. Yeah, I'm thinking you're probably similar, Alicia, in terms of the number of clients you've worked with.
yes, yes, and I think, there is a lot of skeptics out there, but I
Yeah.
believe, and I believe part of that reason is because we haven't yet married the biophysics with biology for humans, right? We're
Mm-mm.
still way far behind
Yep.
the 8 ball with humans, and so with horses, it's even further back, right? Like we're just not seeing the
Yep.
quality of practitioners out there that are using new therapies and combining the cutting edge stuff like the quantum mechanics and biophysics and all of those things that we're learning more about all the time as far as communication
Mm.
of energy and how it works. And so we're just a little bit far behind, but I think it's coming because the at the end of the
Yep.
day, this is what I tell my students: if it isn't working, you have to find another way. Like there, if it's not working, it's not the right thing. And so one of the best ways on exploring what other thing to try is muscle testing. So what do you have to lose?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Totally. My teacher, Dave Collins, one of his favorite things to say, which was utterly annoying whenever we were like, "What do we do about this?" He would say, "Well, muscle test and see." And we would just be
Yes,
like,
I know.
just tell us the answer."
Yes, we just want to know what's happening here. Yeah.
Completely.
Yeah, for sure.
Completely.
For
Yes.
sure.
Oh, so I want to go back a little bit of a ways. You were chatting at the beginning about stressors and this idea of emotional stressors. And I know on
Mhm.
this podcast, pretty much all of our listeners, are in a space of like, yes, horses have emotions. That's a thing. What do you see as far as emotional stressors? How does that show up in your work and with
Oh,
horses?
it's huge. It's huge. And one of the probably the most popular topics in my signature program, Healing Horses Their Way, was flower essence therapy. Because we talk now, once we
Yay.
get to the end, yes, once we get to the end of the program, now we can start dabbling in that emotion because we saw lots of positive changes in the physical health. They have a good understanding of where their horse is at and where they're going, and now the emotions start to come out. Right now, they have a better understanding of what's emotional and what's
Yep.
physical. And so I've seen every emotion under the sun from a horse. They can be jealous, you know, there's
Mhm.
jealousy amongst the
Oh, yeah.
herd, there's that. I recently recommended a flower essence for addiction. The horse was very metabolic and laminitic
Oh.
with their head stuck in a round bill at all times, and she was
Yep.
depressed and
Yep.
just in the cycle of addiction, right, with sugar, which I completely understand.
Yep.
And
Yep.
yeah, so I recommended a flower essences for just to break the addiction for her. They're probably
Mm.
the biggest emotional trigger that I see with the physical health, like which has a very immediate and drastic effect, is grief. I would say that would be the
Yep.
biggest thing. And so, horses, because they're so social and connected to their herd, it's a big deal when they lose a herd member. It's a really big deal whether the herd
Yep.
member leaves or passes away, especially if they witness it. That can leave a mark. It's a trauma for them, and I don't think sometimes people recognize how deep of a trauma, and so they skip over it because they're over it, and their horse is not over it. And so to
Yep.
help them kind of do that, and you probably have some therapies that you use, whether it's Reiki or just moving that energy, I
Mhm.
think really makes
Yep.
a big difference. But you can also use flower essences to help them as well, just to
Oh,
kind of
yeah.
help release that emotion. But often you'll see horses that have experienced a trauma like that at any point in their life. And if there's a subclinical condition happening, meaning that the signs and symptoms aren't quite there yet, that usually is enough to tip them over the edge. So if you have a traumatic event like that,
Yep.
you'll have a laminitic episode sometimes in 72 hours. So it just goes to show the connection
Yep.
between emotion, inflammation, immunity, and physical health. There's just such a strong
Mm.
connection there.
Mm. Yeah. And when I see clients, and I sort of lump these pieces together, and I love how you talk about horses being social creatures. Like this is something that we come back to so many times in our episodes. It just is such a pervasive, like it's such an important essential piece for
Yes.
horses.
Yes.
And so I often will include early weaning for
Yes.
mother and foal. as well as selling a horse, moving or selling a horse,
Yes,
um,
absolutely.
in those, in that category of grief as well.
Yes,
And when we think of horses, like my mare Diva had 4 owners before she came to me. She was 4 years old, right? So
yes,
4 separate herds, 4 separate humans, right?
yes,
Um,
absolutely.
and
And
that's not uncommon. It wasn't like,
no, yes.
that was a crazy amount of homes, right?
Yes, and it's hard to
Yeah.
manage, because we all have to live our lives and do what we can for them, and sometimes that doesn't include keeping them or right? But I think it's also,
Yep.
it's important that they feel heard. And getting
Yeah.
into more animal communication, does your horse want to move? Or what would make it easier for them? Like what's piece is really important to them?
Exactly.
And so just understanding your horse better, being able to really connect to them on that level will make it so much easier because it's also about being heard and understood. And when horses feel misunderstood,
Mm.
you get a certain set of behaviors that can result from that.
Yep.
And I love what happens in the course because when horse owners start moving through the program, I got quite a few emails from them saying, I know I haven't really started anything yet. Like, we haven't really got him on a program, but I don't know if it's in my head, but he's different. Like, something's shifted. Like, he's not the same horse.
Yep.
And the reason is because they see that you're looking at them in a new way and they feel more
Yep.
understood. And so they get to show you certain things. And sometimes they completely fall apart physically
Mm.
as soon as you're looking. Because they
Yes.
finally get a chance to express
Absolutely.
themselves. They're finally someone's
"Oh,
looking, someone's
hello."
paying attention. Yeah, exactly. And everybody's in panic mode going, I just start getting him healthier and he falls apart. Well, all those things were already there. It's just now you're looking at them in a different way. So definitely making sure they're understood is a key part to keeping their emotional balance, I would say.
Yes, and I've seen that over and over when you're because I also do animal communication, so
Yes.
I've taken on a couple of mares, specifically, and it's been so fascinating because both of them I made it my challenge to listen and see them the whole way through our process together and be fully open to what needed to happen. And both
Yes.
of them found through that process, they found their heart people because I was listening and
Isn't that
I
amazing?
was like,
Yeah.
"Okay," I would do sessions when they wanted me to do sessions, and I would, like, do what they needed me to do, and then eventually they were like, "Hey, we see what you've got with Diva. We want that.
Yes.
Can you
Yes,
find me
absolutely.
that?"
Yes.
And I was like, "Okay, I will do my best," and lo and behold, that human would appear, and you'd be like, "How did that happen? I'm not sure how that happened," right? So, they
Absolutely.
do share.
They do, and especially when you're listening, all of a sudden you end up with several sets of hooves running through your head all the time because, they all wanna get in there and start chatting and letting you know what they need, so, yeah, it can take a little while to get it all sorted out for them.
Oh my gosh, it's so true. I would love to just we're getting towards the end of our time, which is so sad. But I wanted to for those people out there, we actually haven't had a podcast yet on flower essences. And I
Oh,
was thinking about this the other day, going, "Oh my gosh, we need a podcast on flower essences." So there might be a
yes.
few people out there going, "What on earth is a flower essence?" So I
Right,
wonder if you
yes.
can
Yes,
share a little bit about them. Yes.
sure. So, many people have heard of the Bach flower remedies, so that constitutes a flower essences. Those are flower essences. You can find them in the health food store. You're not going to find them most likely in the tack and feed store. And what they are is preparations made from flowers. So, for those of you that understand homeopathy, for example, so homeopathy is about diluting substances over and over and over again until it just carries the essence or the vibration of a particular symptom picture you're trying to cure. And so flower essences are the same idea, except they're made in liquid form from flowers to address very specific emotional imbalances. So flower essences are all about the emotions. And there's about, if you look at the ones from Flower Essence Services as well as Bach, there's 140 different flower essences for very
Oh yeah.
specific emotional issues and how they manifest right? How they manifest. So, for example,
Yep.
not every
Yep.
grieving horse is going to present the same way. They're not going to have the same struggles, or they're not going to have the same behaviors around the grief. So, it's really about getting specific on how that emotion is manifesting for them. And they just respond to them so well because they're such vibrational
Oh,
beings themselves. So, the flower
yep.
essences are really, really key when you're trying to help your horses move through emotional things.
Yeah. I used to take my boxes of Pacific essences out with me to the
Oh
barn,
yeah, yeah.
and I would just like lay them on the ground. And the horses would like literally come and like choose a box, like put their nose on one of the boxes, like it's in here. And then
Yes.
like I'd take the lid off and they'd be like, it's right here. Like
Yep.
I'd be like, where do you want it on our body? And they'd like point to a
Absolutely.
shoulder. And I'd be like, oh my God, I need to be filming this stuff. It's so
I
crazy.
love
But
it.
they just
Yes.
it's beautiful. It's so
Yeah.
beautiful to see. They just love them. And
Oh, they do.
yeah, they
Yeah,
can
and
make such a huge difference.
absolutely. And those
Mhm.
essences and vibrational, the thing I love about any kind of plant preparation or forage preparation for horses, because it's their world. That's where they live. They
Yeah,
read,
totally.
eat, and breathe energy. And so using any kind of energy medicine or therapy on horses is just amazing. It's amazing to watch.
I fully agree. Yeah, we're coming to the end of our time, and I know myself and my listeners are. I'm feeling sad about that.
Oh yeah, I know. We
And
could sit here and
I've
talk forever.
just
Yeah.
like I was gonna say we could talk forever. I've
Totally.
so enjoyed, and I've learned a lot today, and I
Awesome.
really appreciate you bringing your knowledge here to the podcast. For those out there, I'm sure there's people that are really curious about how they get in touch with you, how they access your work and your program.
Yes.
Yeah,
So,
where do they go?
yeah, so probably the best place to go would be my website, which is elishaedwards.com. And it's Elisha Edwards.com. And on the homepage, you'll
Hmm.
see I rotate them frequently, but if you click the sign up button there, you'll get sent whatever article or chart or reference or resource I have up there. So you can do that. That'll put you on my list so that you can stay notified on new courses that are coming out, the launch of my next signature program, and all of that. So that's a good way to stay in the loop. I am looking at
Mm,
launching, for those of you that might be interested in joining the signature program, which is a 15-week online program. But we do lots of lives at a distance, obviously. We have so much technology we can use, so that's great. And I'll probably be launching that one in January, February of next year. I think coming into spring, I just wrapped up the 15-week signature program, and I love bringing the horses into spring. It's just a good
yeah,
time of year to start practicing with them, using them, and all of that. So yeah, I'll probably be looking at launching that. I also have coming metabolic syndrome, resolving metabolic syndrome naturally mini course, and that's going to be a do-it-yourself program. So it's not going to be on a set time, it's not going to be a set
yep.
time or anything like that, but you can literally register, do it yourself, and just finish it off whenever you want. And there'll be a ton of resources in there for those of you that have horses with insulin resistance, Cushing's, and any of that. So, yeah, that's coming probably in
Awesome.
the next couple of weeks. So, if you are interested in that or taking a look at what's all in there, just go to my website, sign up, join my list, and you'll get notified.
Wonderful, wonderful. And I will include a couple of the other, like the Riva's Remedies website and things
Oh,
on
awesome.
the
Yes.
resource page. So for
Nice.
everybody out there who's listening on Spotify or iTunes or another podcast provider, you can
Yeah.
always go to www.wholehorse.ca and look up this episode. This will be episode 57, I believe. And you can find the resources there. So Alicia's website and some other great resources as well. So
Awesome.
check it out. And yeah, thank you so much, Alicia. This has
Okay,
been
thank you,
great.
Alexa. Thanks for having me. Enjoy the rest of your day, everybody.
Yeah, we will. Thank you to everybody who's tuning in. I hope you enjoyed yourself as much as I did, and we'll look forward to chatting with you next time. And we'll see you very soon. Okay, bye for now. Thanks for listening, everybody. If you're interested in a remote session with you and your horse, or interested in some of my upcoming events like my Whole Horse Apprenticeship starting September 15th, you can always get in touch at alexa@alexalinton.com. Looking forward to hearing from you soon. Okay, have a great day.